Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Frank and Stan chat. This is number 74, and I'm joined by my good friends, Stan Johnson. Good morning, Stan.
Morning, everyone.
Yeah, you're
in Wales again.
Yeah, I am. Yeah, we came last night, and we're here till well, I won't say how long we're here because people know where I live. But we're here for just a few hours. But the burglar alarm's on and everything, so fine at home. Yeah, so it's funny because obviously last year we weren't here during the autumn, and certainly I think we were sort of at this time last year we weren't able to visit Wales, so we didn't get to the caravan. So here we are, and it feels a bit chilly at night. That's the thing. So yeah. So anyway, so how are you?
I'm good. It's been a bit miserable weather-wise, but I'm nearly at the point of finishing the shed stroke bar, so that's taken up nearly every day for the last.
Can we have a Frankenstein chat from
the bar?
I think so. I think we should do that nearer to Christmas, perhaps, if it's finished by then.
Well, it'll be finished by the end of half term, I think. My son's away with school on that outdoor stuff in Wales, and I'm hoping at least when he gets back, you can walk in and feel as though it's nearly finished. It's taken so long.
Yeah. Okay, so what's caught your eye this week, Stan?
Well, a combination of two things, really. On Twitter, the tone of some of the school leaders, particularly, it seems to have dropped to I'm fed up with this. I've had enough. I don't know how long I can do this, and I just wonder if that's typical or if it's just the people that tend to use Twitter who want to share their emotions. But it linked to something else that was brought to my attention last week, which is about appointing senior managers in schools. And one, the low level of applications in terms of number. And then secondly, how well prepared those people are for deputy headship and headship. And I wonder sometimes if it's because we're now reaching into a level below that we would normally reach into. When it's very popular to apply for school leaderships, you get people preparing for it in advance.
Yeah.
When it's right, well, we're struggling to find somebody, or everyone knows that it's, not many people applying. I think people apply that haven't gone through that preparation process, or that preparation process isn't there.
No, it's interesting. My son-in-law is just about to embark on an NPQML, and I know that when I was involved in the co-op at the Co-op Academies Trust, a head teacher had been through all of these programs and actually come out the other end and thought, no, that isn't the way to do it. So that colleague put together their own program, which I know is still running today. But basically, it felt as though there wasn't sufficient sort of insight into these sorts of challenges, and also I think there was a sense that, this idea around values and principles, really at the heart of it, that's what motivated me, to want to lead. It wasn't the fact that I wanted to be the boss. It was the fact that I could influence more people in terms of the way in which I think we ought to be teaching, and learning. So whether or not the programs are at fault, I don't know. I've not actually, I do contribute to an executive leaders program, but where we emphasize values and principles, I do anyway, heavily, but whether it's something deeper.
I'm not sure whether it's I don't know the programs well enough. I just think they are national programs and they're written as a national program and they're to be delivered as they are written. So I just wonder, my thing about context is everything.
Yeah.
We used to find when I worked in Lancashire, what works nationally doesn't necessarily work in a 2-teacher school in beautiful Lancashire. So context is really important. And I think my other issue is that I think we've made, I've said this before, we've made leadership so important and so, sought after, and we've kind of forgotten management.
Mm.
And actually, I see it every time I see it on Twitter. It sticks in me when you say leadership versus management.
Well,
They're the same person in school.
yes,
The
yes,
leader and the manager are the same person. So it's not about leadership versus management. It's about having both sets of skills. Or if you haven't got one of those sets of skills, make sure somebody who works near you and with you
absolutely.
does
Yeah.
have.
Yeah, I mean that's interesting because this week I went back to my old school where I was the head, and they've got an interim head teacher for 7 weeks before the new head teacher starts, and this is a teacher that I appointed, oh gosh, I don't know, it's many years ago, but actually that colleague, was an amazing teacher. And I remember saying to her, you really need to think about, leadership. You need to think about getting the big job. So in a way, it was nice to be able to go back and see that she'd got it, but actually for only 7 weeks. But we talked about the head and deputy at that school. So I had a deputy who was more around making it work. And so in a way, I never appointed a deputy in the two headships I had. But actually, I felt lucky with that deputy because in a way, she did all the things that I wasn't very good at, and I think I did the things that she didn't like doing. She wasn't very keen on being right at the front and whatever. I was more than happy to do that, but she was the one that made it look right and actually ensured that everything went like clockwork on the day. So it's a good combo that. The other thing though that's caught my eye this week is, and it relates to this really, is I'm pretty down, I suppose. I think I knew I was going to be down about the appointment of the new chair of the Social Mobility Commission. It's not a personal thing. I've never met the colleague, but actually the thing that worries me most is when people find themselves in a position and actually they've got very little experience. They have a lot of experience of a few settings. And I think one of the things I've learned is, as you were saying before, how's this going to work in, I don't know, Bootle in North Cumbria? How is it going to work in that primary school, which has just got 2 classrooms? How does this work there? And actually, I think that one of the things I've found is that I've gained knowledge about how to do things and how not to do things. And both of those things on my visits to schools have been powerful. I find it amazing that people say, oh, I've got to go and see this outstanding practice, as if to say, well, go and see some really rubbish as well, because I found that really as interesting as seeing something.
When you can identify what's going wrong in a school, then there's a lot more. Actually, you learn a lot more by analysing things that have gone wrong and helping to put it right than you do just going observing something that's ticking over.
Yes.
Or doing well.
Now, this new chair of the commission said the most remarkable thing, Stan, that if you improve behaviour, you tend to get better. I mean, for heaven's sake, I mean, I thought, what? Yeah. I mean, I think we all work that out.
Yeah. But
don't think it took me to get to headship. I think it probably took me the first time I stood in front of a class. I mean, if you don't have decent behaviour, everybody suffers. And I thought, okay, well, so your response to improving social mobility is just improved behaviour. Is that what you're bringing to the party? Is that what it is? So actually, I think it's really sort of deeply sort of worrying, really, that it's all around the lack of breadth of experience.
Yeah, I think those contrasts, right? The one that sticks in my mind is when Ofsted were pushing head teachers to be far more aggressive, I think, with their evaluation of teachers, and saying, you must really put pressure on them. You're not their friend, blah blah blah. And at the time, I was supporting a 2-teacher school in beautiful countryside in Lancashire. And the thought of this head teacher saying to the other teacher in the school, you really need to buck up. We're not friends. I'm here to do this. Oh, and by the way, can I have a lift home with you tonight? Or sitting there in the staff room at lunchtime, just the two of them. It doesn't work.
No.
And you've got to contextualize everything to say, different schools need different situations, need different problem solving.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it in a way, I know that I don't know if it's the CEO, but actually the Chartered College of Teaching, the boss there, was being interviewed by the Times, and called Ofsted the reign of terror, and I understand where all that comes from, but that actually is perpetuated by these sorts of comments previously about how you're meant to weed out weak teaching. I mean, I find it sort of quite staggering, really. We've been doing this since 1992, but by gum, there's just too many weak teachers around. I mean, I just don't see that. I mean, anybody that
goes into schools regularly doesn't see that.
No.
And I mean, I go back, well, I know you do as well, to the point where that was first extrapolated from the data, which just was completely false.
Yes.
It was the percentage of lessons. So a teacher, I defy any teacher to say they are outstanding every single lesson that they do. Yeah. And if you said to them, out of 100 lessons, how many are less than that? They might say, 5% maybe, 2.5% if they're very, but 5% then got translated into, it was actually 10%, wasn't it, at the time? 10% of teachers are therefore unsatisfactory, not that lessons may be unsatisfactory 10% of the time. Yeah,
I mean, again, I think that was made on Newsnight, wasn't it, by Chris Woodhead. And I know that after that, there was a scurrying around trying to justify that, because he had in his head the number of lessons that have been judged unsatisfactory. But the broader thing is around how do you actually, because this was the conversation I had with a colleague at the school when I returned this week. What's the best way to improve teaching? Is it, you can only go around hammering teachers before you then start, people think, oh, I can't be bothered anymore. You obviously don't value me. I'll find somewhere else to go and work. Or you can sort of engage with them and actually begin to have conversations with them, whereby you're, as far as I'm concerned, equal in the discussion. Because actually it does annoy me. I've gone completely off, sort of assessing teachers in that sort of formal way. And I used to do that all the time, but I've gone off it because I think, well, it only takes you so far. It doesn't actually, it doesn't reach the hearts and minds of the issue. It doesn't actually get the teacher to reflect on, well, actually, that was a good chat. Perhaps, if it's all around haranguing and actually, well, I've been judged as this grade, I don't think that's actually going to get to the point whereby it might get rid of some really weak teachers. Don't get me wrong. I just don't think there are that many around. But if there are, people need a mechanism for, nobody wants their children to be taught by a very weak teacher. But actually, I don't see that when I visit schools. But actually, I'm not sure that that's the best way to actually draw out improvement either.
But and what it did, and what it still does in some schools, is focus all the attention on, how do we get rid of X number of teachers? Yes. In fact, one, that's pretty hard. And two, if your energy is going in that, you're not putting your energy in things that make your school good and lifting the school. And I know this was something you did, working alongside a teacher, and at the end of the lesson, as equals, saying, right, what went right, what went wrong, what if we were doing that together as a pair, what would we do differently?
Yes.
And having a professional conversation is far, far better than a clipboard and saying, that's a 3.
Well, when I left Ofsted, I went for a year to work in Stockport as a senior advisor, and I developed a program called Mucking In, which basically meant that I would go into a classroom and help. I'd be a helper. I'd muck in, but actually at the end of the lesson, both the teacher and myself would have a conversation about what we saw or what we experienced, or how easy was it, for me as well. So it was me bringing my experience and my awareness of what I'd just seen. But hopefully, a key thing was to actually make the lesson go better. Having 2 teachers in a classroom, actually all of them working to try and help the learning, it seems to me better use of time than one teacher flat out trying to prove to another teacher who's got a clipboard or writing things down, not engaging with the children at all. And to me, it seems ridiculous if that's the best use of that time of that other member of staff. So, interestingly, my one of our children teaches in a Stockport school, and a member of staff who was there at the time referred back to mucking in as that's the way we ought to be doing it. And I thought, well, that's a sort of, I felt quite proud of the fact that something I'd developed, still what is now over 10 years gone, is still thought of as having some value, But the conversation with the senior teacher, or the head teacher now at my old school, that's where that conversation went, and we sort of, I don't think we had we didn't align in our views on it, but actually, I think those sorts of conversations confirm in my own thinking, where I sit, and that's probably quite useful as well.
I think the question that's in my head when people say, how can we improve teaching further, is usually, is that what you mean? Or do you mean, how can we get better results?
Yes.
Actually, it's like, I want to lose weight. Do you really want to lose weight, or do you just want to be thinner? Because those are different things. And I do think it's still pressure to get results that's narrow the teaching. According to I don't know if you've seen Nick Gibbs' recent leap into the education, leap back in with his
just can't leap, can he?
No.
No.
And him saying, this is because schools weren't interested in the curriculum until Ofsted suddenly made it.
Again, this is somebody.
I wish you could just sit down with somebody and say, schools have been interested in the curriculum for as long as I can remember. But I can remember, especially after Every Child Matters, when everyone was looking at a more creative and more positive curriculum, everyone was saying, but I'll have to wait till Ofsted have been before I do.
Yeah.
And it was a barrier to curriculum development.
Yeah, in the next couple of weeks, I know we've got an ex-HMI, Julie Price-Grimshaw, joining us. And Julie left the inspectorate in 2007. And I think what happens, she's reflecting now. It takes you some time to get to a point where you think, well, actually, did I do some good? Was this worth doing? Did I help or did I hinder? But actually, the issue here was, I think that it's made me think about, is Ofsted actually, particularly for the communities? let's face it, the government, every government is keen to try and help those that are the most disadvantaged, the ones that have they're lower down the hill, when they start school, and everybody wants them to climb that hill more quickly. Well, at least I think they do, to get further up the hill to catch up. But actually, how is Ofsted actually preventing some schools serving some of the most challenging communities where the kids have got the most to climb? Are they actually helping, or are they hindering that sort of improvement? Because at times you need to be quite creative, and you need to be exploratory, and you need to try things. And actually, I think that's something that I'm not entirely convinced that the Ofsted approach is one that embraces that.
I've told you this tale before. I'm sure I've probably told it online before. When I came back from that year with Ofsted, I was ready to do all the things. I'll observe teachers, I'll grade teachers, and particularly history. I said, you know, we need to really clamp down on history and get our children to understand right from the beginning what's factual, what's not, what's made up, what who real people are, who are ficted from. And I had a real go at the whole staff over it. And I went back to my office afterwards, and my deputy came in and destroyed me with one line. And she just said, yeah, that's really good. I'll support you on that. What do you want me to do about the tooth fairy? She was teaching in reception. It's just right. I need to be reprogrammed back into remembering that these are children and not automated robots that we're trying to fill with stuff.
But when you think about it, Stan, what we had in that year, I think we undertook, I don't know, must have been about 15 inspections.
Yeah.
And they were taking us to places you and I had never been before. You know, we were up in Cumbria and in North Lancashire, you know, visiting some very, very small rural schools, some of them with 2 or 3 classrooms, you know. And actually, I think the contribution it made to my development was always around, as you say, seeing things from a different point of view. And actually, you know, if all your experiences of a large secondary school in London, you know, you really have got quite a narrow range of experience, you know. I mean, and that's not speaking for every single, and I don't speak for every teacher in the country, but actually what I do bring is, I don't know how many schools you and I visited, you know, I don't know how many I've inspected, I don't know how many inspection reports I've cleared, thousands, and that's all in the pot. You know, I think that we do need to get to a point where, if we're going to be putting sort of senior people into quite influential positions, I think we've got to have, and this is why I think schools, many teachers rebel at these appointments, is that they don't appear to be the right people, not because there's anything wrong with them, but they simply haven't got sufficient experience of the education system in the country to actually sort of bring that to bear in their thinking and in their decision making.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I just think until you've seen that many schools, it really opens your eyes. I mean, the first thing is, especially if you come from a school that's running well, the first thing is, wow, I didn't realise that things in some schools weren't running anywhere. You assume all schools are in the same position, and that sort of took me by surprise. But in the last 10 years, I've not seen anything that really opened my eyes wide and or made my jaw drop. I've just not seen it.
I've seen things where, you know, I've seen incidents that are not reflective of the school, but things happen when you've got sort of 2,000 teenagers on a site. Things happen, you know, even in the very best schools, you know, in the most polite schools, in the most, you know, affluent schools, in the most selective of schools, things go wrong. You know, but actually I think that there is something here that events, individual events, small events that can happen during inspection seem to be, because they've seen that's then a reflection of many, many other things, you know, much more deep rooted issues. But I think these are just incidents. This is an incident. This is not reflective of what goes on all the time. You can everybody can weave something into, you know, oh, well, that happened because this happened, and that's all conjecture. They didn't see it, but there's a connection, trying to connect it into a negative, into negativity, shall I say, so that actually that's viewed then to support a more negative judgment.
Well, do you remember, Frank, in the early days, inspectors, you got inspectors sometimes that came to work with you, who you hadn't worked with before, and I can remember one saying that you know, IT was definitely unsatisfactory because hardly any of the computers were switched on. So I looked at them and said, "What about music?" And they said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, nobody's been on the piano. Does that make you know, the piano's not being used. Does that make a judgment on?" Well, if they're not using the computers, it can't be good. No, you haven't seen anybody, so you've no evidence, so you can't make a judgment. That's where you are at the moment. So you need to go and find some different evidence. And it's that approach that, as you say, a small thing like that, and suddenly somebody extrapolates that to a problem in the school when it's actually a problem with evidence collecting.
Yes.
Or the understanding of the person collecting the evidence.
The thing is, though, is that you want to, I think the curriculum agenda has become so, I mean, we talked about this last week, I think, about so subject-based that actually, going back to your little primary school in Bootle in North Cumbria, with 2 teachers, if there isn't sufficient flexibility in just the thinking around that, I mean, these people are superhuman. Actually, if the context isn't taken into account, I think we're hearing where, I mean, we never know, do we? We actually don't know the truth here. We hear stories about what Ofsted are doing, but actually there are, and certainly last week, in the Northeast, I heard loads of stories. It was absolute carnage. It really was. Yeah. And I wasn't stoking that up at all. So there is something going wrong at the moment. I can feel it in the water.
Yeah. Well, I think when Ofsted do videos about subjects and say this is how it should be, like the geography one struck me, and children at all levels should be blah 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 blah. When they finish this run, I think it's incomprehensible that they can't put something together. I don't think they can, by the way, but they should be able to put a curriculum map together that meets all those requirements, and I'd love to see it. I really would.
Well, I saw this at the introduction of I mean, this is going back to 1992. I saw this in Llandudno. I went on a HMI-led summer school called CAPS. It was called Curriculum and Assessment in the Primary School, and a guy came. There were about 100 people from around the country. It was fascinating because the first time I'd ever got out into seeing what other things were happening around the country, and he basically rolled out. This is early days of national curriculum. He rolled out this sort of line of wallpaper, basically, and he had seven wallpaper rolls, and he rolled it out and he laid it on top of each other, and they connected everything. And the point here, I remember him saying that this is not a straitjacket. This is just to ensure that there is some that it's not about the children, it's about the teachers are aware of what the previous year would have covered, assuming that the children were there. That the children stayed, and the new kids would always suffer, if they came into the school. But for me, it was transformed it for me. Actually, I could see a school that actually sort of really unpicked this. But the point he always made was that, and in those days there was flexibility. Teachers need flex, in order to actually deliver it. And there will be bits of this that they can't do because they don't have sufficient subject knowledge to actually do it.
No, and in the positives, Frank, when you think of, again, small schools in Cumbria, when we looked at geography in one particular school, yes, we've been out and followed a stream from it being a spring in the hills right the way through to it joining the river. So, try doing that in London or in central Manchester.
Well, let's give a shout out, Stan. I mean, in that year, which was 1995-96, we saw some amazingly brilliant practice. I have to say, it was only you and I, we won't mention the school, but you and I know the school where this was a school out of control and the children were in charge. And in a way, that for us was the reason why we did the year, I think, because we knew that there were schools like that. But the vast majority of teachers we saw in that year, and that's very early days Ofsted, were really brilliant teachers, And actually, I go back to, I'll give a shout out to High Heskett Primary School, which was in the Eden Valley. And that was a joy to visit that school. The curriculum was, the environment was the curriculum, and it was very practical. And the parents bought into it, the kids bought into it. There was no glory hunters. I don't even remember the head teacher's name. I don't even remember. All I remember is the children's joy at learning, and actually the relevance of it, because this was about their their community where they lived. These are things that on walking to school, they would have a better understanding of things that they were seeing. That was amazing. I think I know your one. What was your one?
I can't remember the name of the school. There were actually several where there were bits. I mean, the one I know you're referring to, and I can't remember its name.
Wasn't it? Well, did it begin with a B, Stan?
I honestly can't remember.
I think it was Burnside.
Yes,
I think
it was in Burnside, but was it
right?
Call that, or was it?
I don't know, because in Cumbria, a lot of the schools are named after Saint somebody or other.
I think it was. It might have been but it was. That was the experience that the children had, and how they delivered their curriculum through understanding rather than through telling and knowledge.
Yes.
And you'll remember those reception children painting hyacinths with only red, blue, and green. And
didn't they did colour mixing as part of their induction into reception?
Yeah, with small paintbrushes and little
But I have to say,
taking that back to my school at the time and saying, right, we're doing this in reception. I took a group, and after about an hour and a half, I think I threw my paintbrush down.
But I saw as good at, and it's a complete joy for me to still get little tweets from Co-op Academy Oakwood, where the early years department there is of just the amazing quality. And the observational art that goes on there, and the creativity is staggeringly brilliant. I mean, certainly this week there was some watercolors based on autumn leaves. If I showed you those, you'd think it was year 6. You really, and actually most year 6s wouldn't be able to produce anything quite as good as that in most schools.
I think it was in that school actually that we had a lay inspector at the time who
for those of you who are not as old as us, a lay inspector was somebody who wasn't a teacher, who joined the school, joined the inspection team, and actually sort of did a lot of basically was an independent voice, really.
To look at it from someone who hadn't had an upbringing in schools.
But
he didn't get how excited I was over some of the artwork. And he said, well, what's so special about this? And it was a green, purples, blues on a sugar paper painted. And I said, right, you see that? And I said, yeah. And I said, have you ever seen a Turner waterscape? And he went, wow, I can see what you're saying now. I said, this was painted by a 7-year-old.
Yeah.
Right. Now I'm starting to get what and it was
I think one of the lovely things I've got to be careful of the time here, but one of the lovely things that I think you see probably more in primary schools is where particular teachers, they can draw out that strand of expertise that they've got initially on their own class, but then if they've got a coordinator role or whatever, they can draw that out in others. That's much more the nature of primary schools, obviously, than it is secondaries.
If we go back to judging teachers, I know when I was ahead, some of my teachers were better at teaching than others, but some brought things to the wider curriculum that needed counting as well as their ability in the classroom. So it might be slightly less than teacher A, but this teacher then runs gardening club or does this or does that or engages with the community with X, Y, and Z.
Do you remember?
You've got to bring that in.
You do. I mean, I do remember though. We were very fortunate to be mentored for the entire year, which is probably something we'll talk to Judy Price Grimshaw about in a couple of weeks' time, this ex-HMI who's joining us. And we were fortunate. We had a year's induction, Stan. Everything we did during that year was carefully monitored, wasn't it? We had the most amazing and our deepest respect for our HMI mentor, who went on to be the chief inspector. But actually, as I reflect back on that, what a formidable, experience that was. What a formidable woman that was. And and we helped her. That was the point I want to make here.
Yeah.
She helped us become better inspectors. We helped her understand primary schools better.
Yeah.
And I think that, this idea that the example you gave where, the computers aren't on, therefore it's got to be inadequate. I think the Miriam, our mentor, she always said at the end of it, get all the evidence and let it wash over you. What's it telling you about the school? Don't get yourself down a rabbit hole where you think, I think that's possibly where they are at the moment. Don't get yourself down a rabbit hole where X has happened, and then you try and find out, well, why has X happened? Well, X happened. Don't go looking for Y and Z. X happened. Come out of that rabbit hole and put yourself around and see then what else is happening to give you a better picture of what the experience is like, and be less specific about it. It's about an overall evaluation at the end of the day.
I'm just thinking back something you said earlier, and I can't get this incident out of my head now. It was a colleague who we won't name. It's about, when mucking in, when people help out. And I remember this particular inspector watching a games lesson and then saying it was really, really poor. And then a parent came and intervened, and the quality of the lesson went up.
I do remember watching a game in that year where they had an inter-school match, and the football match it was, and you couldn't see the lines.
I remember that.
The ball went behind the bush.
Yeah.
And so the teacher in charge said, play on. And the kids were actually behind us. We were what we thought was the end of the pitch. They were behind us playing the game, but behind a bush. I have to say that wasn't the greatest school, though, was it?
I was going to say that was the school where I think that the leadership and management was. I think the phrase actually we used was "not yet satisfactory,"
yes,
which was a very odd phrase. And the head turned to the deputy and said, "Do you think that'll reflect on us?"
And on that happy note, but I suppose the thing for me is that if things have moved on, and I do think that Ofsted's played a role in that. I just think that we've probably reached a point where it needs to do something slightly different.
I think for me the measure was going into a school which had clearly not understood anything about what Ofsted were there. This was very early on, obviously. Didn't realise we'd be going into classes, didn't realise we'd be watching teachers teach, and had nothing prepared already. And it was a shock to see that in a school. I know I did something about it afterwards. But from that point to like 3, 4, 5 years later, the difference in schools in terms of self-evaluation, beginning to understand themselves, I do think that's done a great service. But we haven't changed it.
No,
we haven't moved with the times. We've just looked at different aspects of the schools to cover. We need in my view, we definitely need a different approach now.
Well, let's use that. I mean, obviously we're going to have Julie on in 2 weeks. I think, I was a big advocate for self-evaluation, and I know you still are. So I think Julie is as well.
I was in the book, Frank. I was in the book. Self-evaluation matters.
So we'll get onto this in 2 weeks' time. Next week we've got a year 2 teacher, so we're going to hear exactly what it's been like for the last 7-8 weeks or whatever, the first half term, coping with COVID and all that. So we're certainly going to hear the voice of a teacher next week. So it's great to thank you for giving us 40 minutes of your time, folks. And
sorry we've wobbled on a bit.
I know. I hope it's been interesting.
We must do an episode one where we just go through some of those anecdotes from.
Well, I was going to interview Stan. I was going to turn up one week and just say, I'm going to interview you. So I might dump that on you in the next year sometime, because we've got guests all the way up now.
What's the craziest thing? What the funniest thing that Head said to you? I'll go for a finish on this. In Liverpool, Where can we get somewhere for lunch? Okay, well, if you go to the end of the street, there's a pub on every corner as you go along. Don't stop.
Yeah, when
Wait
you're
till
about
you get to a McDonald's.
when you're about 6 miles down the road, that's probably
Yeah.
a decent place to find.
Yeah, and everybody around this school, if you're in a suit, will assume you're from the police.
Okay, look, we'll see you all next week, and for what will be the 75th edition. So thank you, everybody. Take care. Bye bye.
Cheers. Bye.